The hum of the private jet's engine was the only sound Adrian Vance usually listened to. A man who had built an empire from nothing. He controlled everything in his world. Or so he thought. Today, standing in the chaos of JFK's International Terminal, his meticulously crafted universe is about to shatter. Across the sea of faces, he spots her. Elena, the woman who walked away 5 years ago. But it's not the ghost of her memory that freezes the blood in his veins. It's the small child in her arms, a boy with his eyes, his son. The air in the private lounge at LaGuardia was as sterile as Adrian Vance's life had become. It smelled of expensive leather, single malt scotch, and the quiet desperation of men who had everything and felt nothing. At 35, Adrian was the poster boy for the American dream, a narrative he'd spun from the ashes of a rough childhood in Queens. His company, Vance Innovations, was a titan in the tech world, its logo a symbol of ruthless efficiency and forward-thinking that was in reality a reflection of its founder. He checked his Patek Philippe, a nervous tick he'd developed in boardrooms where seconds cost millions. 3:15 p.m. His flight to London for the merger that would make him a billionaire was in an hour. Everything was scheduled, controlled, perfect. Yet a strange restlessness gnawed at him, a phantom limb of a past he'd amputated long ago. His fiancée, Claire Vanderbilt, a woman whose pedigree was as flawless as her diamonds, texted him. Closing the deal. Darling, the Hamptons property is ours. Can't wait to celebrate. Don't forget the meeting with the wedding planner tomorrow. Love you, he typed back a perfunctory, love you too. The words feeling like a foreign language on his tongue. A sudden announcement crackled over the lounge's discreet speakers. All commercial flights to London Heathrow have been temporarily grounded due to a security threat. Further information will be provided shortly. A collective groan rippled through the lounge. Adrian's private jet wasn't affected, but the announcement triggered a cascade of delays that would ripple out, and a thread of unease tightened in his chest. His COO, David Chen, was already on the phone, his voice a low, urgent murmur. Adrian, needing a change of scenery from the suffocating quiet, decided to walk through the main terminal. It was a world he hadn't inhabited in years, a chaotic symphony of crying babies, arguing couples, and the frantic energy of people going somewhere, anywhere. He kept his head down, a futile attempt at anonymity when his face had graced the cover of Forbes just last month. And then he saw her. It was like a punch to the gut, stealing the air from his lungs. Across the bustling concourse, near a Cinnabon, stood Elena Petrova. 5 years. It had been 5 years since he'd last seen her, since the fight that had shattered them both. She looked different, yet achingly the same. The wild, dark curls he'd loved to bury his face in were tamed into a practical ponytail. The fire in her eyes, the one that had both captivated and terrified him, was banked, replaced by a weary resilience. She was wearing a simple grey sweater and jeans, a stark contrast to the designer armor he wore. But it wasn't just her. In her arms, she held a small child, a little boy, with a mop of dark, unruly hair, who was currently trying to grab her silver necklace. He couldn't be more than 4 years old. Adrian froze, his billion-dollar merger and his perfect fiancée evaporating from his mind. He watched, hidden behind a pillar, as Elena gently pried the necklace from the boy's chubby fingers, murmuring something that made him giggle. The sound, even from a distance, was a dagger to Adrian's heart. He took a step forward, then another, his feet moving of their own accord. As he got closer, the child turned his head, and Adrian's world tilted on its axis. The boy had his eyes, Not just the color, a deep, startling blue, that was a signature of the Vance men, but the shape, the intensity. He had Adrian's stubborn chin, the same curve of the mouth. Time seemed to slow down. He could hear the frantic beat of his own heart over the cacophony of the airport. The dates spun in his head, a frantic, desperate calculation. 5 years since he'd seen her. The boy was 4. It was possible. No, it was undeniable. He was standing right in front of her before he even realized he'd crossed the space between them. Elena, her head snapped up, her eyes widening in a mixture of shock and something else. Fear. Pure, undiluted fear. She instinctively tightened her grip on the child, pulling him closer as if to shield him from a predator. Adrian, she breathed, her voice barely a whisper. What are you doing here? I could ask you the same thing, he said, his voice rougher than he intended. He couldn't tear his gaze from the boy who was now staring at him with wide, curious blue eyes. Who's the kid, Elena? She paled, her knuckles white as she clutched the child's back. He's my son. Your son, Adrian repeated the words, tasting like ash. I see. And his father, Elena's jaw tightened. That's none of your business, isn't it? He challenged, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. He looks to be about 4 years old. That's a funny coincidence, isn't it? Seeing as we broke up 5 years ago, she flinched as if he'd struck her. Adrian, don't do this. Not here. Then where, Elena? Where were you going to tell me? He demanded, his voice rising, drawing a few curious glances from passers-by. Or weren't you? Were you just going to raise my son in secret and never say a word? The boy, sensing the tension, started to fuss, burying his face in his mother's shoulder. Mommy, who's that man? He whimpered. The word mummy from the boy's lips, directed at the love of his life, a woman he had systematically pushed away, was a fresh wound. He's no one. Leo, Elena, said, her voice shaking. She tried to turn away to escape, but Adrian blocked her path. Leo, Adrian's voice cracked. They had talked about names once, late at night, tangled in sheets and dreams. He had liked Leo. She had remembered. Let me go, Adrian, she pleaded, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. You have your own life now. I've seen the magazines. The beautiful fiancée, the empire. What do you want from us? What do I want? He echoed, a bitter, incredulous laugh escaping his lips. I want to know why you lied to me. I want to know why you kept my son from me for 4 years. You think it's that simple? She shot back, her fear giving way to a flash of the old fire he remembered. You think you can just waltz back in and play the part of the concerned father? Where were you, Adrian? Where were you when he had his first fever, and I was alone and terrified? Where were you when he took his first steps? Where were you for the 1,000 sleepless nights I was where you left me? He retorted, the old anger, the old hurt roaring back to life. You were the one who walked away. You said you couldn't handle my life, my ambition. You said I was a monster. And was I wrong? She whispered, her voice laced with a pain that mirrored his own. Look at you. You're a king in a world of glass and steel, but you're all alone. Her words hit their mark. He was alone. In a crowd of people, in a life full of acquisitions and mergers, he was utterly alone. And the proof of it was standing right in front of him, in the form of a 4-year-old boy, with his eyes, a boy he never knew existed. His phone buzzed again. Claire. He ignored it. The world he had so carefully constructed was crumbling around him, and in the center of the ruins stood Elena and a little boy named Leo, his son. We need to talk, he said, his voice no longer angry, just hollow. Not here. My flight. I'll cancel it. We'll go somewhere private. Elena looked at him, her expression a battleground of conflicting emotions. He could see the fear, the anger, but he could also see a flicker of the old connection, the one he thought he'd extinguished forever. Fine, she said, her voice barely audible over the din of the airport. But this is on my terms, Adrian. You don't get to control this. Not anymore. He nodded, a strange sense of surrender washing over him. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't in control. And as he looked at the sun, he never knew. He realized he didn't want to be. He just wanted to know him, whatever the cost. The ride to Adrian's penthouse was a study in suffocating silence. The air in the back of the Maybach, usually a sanctuary of calm for him, was thick with 5 years of unspoken words and the palpable tension between two people who were once everything to each other. Elena sat stiffly on the opposite side of the plush leather seat, her arm a protective barrier around a now sleeping Leo. Adrian watched them in the reflection of the tinted window, a family portrait he had no right to be in. His penthouse, a sprawling duplex overlooking Central Park, was designed to impress. Minimalist, with floor-to-ceiling windows, museum-quality art, and an air of untouchable wealth. It was a place for closing deals and hosting parties, not for a little boy's scattered toys or a woman's soft touch. As they stepped out of the private elevator and into the cavernous living room, Elena's posture became even more rigid. She looked around at the cold, impersonal space, and Adrian saw it through her eyes. For the first time, not a home, but a monument to his own ambition. A gilded cage. You can put him down in one of the guest rooms, he said, his voice echoing slightly in the vastness of the room. Elena clutched Leo tighter. I'll keep him with me. Adrian's jaw tightened, but he nodded. As you wish. Can I get you anything, water, tea? No, thank you, she said, her voice formal, distant. She sank into the corner of a massive white sofa, a small island in a sea of beige marble, and settled Leo on her lap, stroking his dark hair. Adrian stood awkwardly in the middle of the room, a stranger in his own home. He, a man who could command a boardroom of sharks with a single glance, had no idea what to do, what to say. He unbuttoned his suit jacket, suddenly feeling suffocated. Why, Elena, he finally asked the question, raw, stripped of the anger from the airport. Just why? She didn't look at him, her eyes fixed on her son's sleeping face. Why do you think, Adrian, I found out I was pregnant a week after we broke up? The fight? It was the worst one we'd ever had. You told me I was holding you back, that my dreams were too small. You said you were destined for bigger things than a life with a struggling artist in a cramped apartment in Brooklyn. He flinched, the memory of his own cruel words, a fresh sting. He had been so desperate to succeed, so terrified of being dragged back into the poverty of his childhood, that he had pushed away the only person who had ever seen him, the real him, beneath the armor. I was an idiot, he said, the admission costing him more than any business deal ever had. I was scared. We were both scared, she corrected, her voice soft but firm. But I was the one left to pick up the pieces. I called you Adrian 12 times. You never answered. I even went to your office, but your secretary, a very polite but firm woman named Mrs. Gable, told me you were unavailable. Indefinitely. Adrian's blood ran cold. He remembered telling Mrs. Gable to block all calls from Elena, to send back any mail. He had been trying to cauterize a wound, not realizing he was severing a lifeline. I was going to tell you, she continued, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. I had the speech rehearsed and everything. But then I saw an article online. Tech wunderkind Adrian Vance and socialite Claire Vanderbilt, the city's new power couple. There were pictures of you two at some gala, smiling happy. You had moved on, just like you said you would. What was I supposed to do? Show up on your doorstep pregnant and alone and ruin your perfect new life? Ruin my life, he repeated, incredulous. Elena, you were my life. And a child? Our child? That's not a ruin. That's a foundation. Is it? She challenged, finally looking at him, her eyes flashing with a spark of the old fire. Look at this place, Adrian. It's beautiful, it's perfect, but it's not a home. It's a showroom. Would you have had time for a baby between your 80-hour work weeks and your trips to London and Tokyo? Would your new girlfriend have welcomed the bastard child of your ex-girlfriend with open arms? He had no answer because he knew she was right. Claire, with her perfect life and her high society friends, would have seen a child from a previous relationship as a complication, a blemish on their carefully curated image. And he, in his relentless pursuit of more, would he have been the father Leo deserved? So you just decided for me? He asked, the hurt evident in his voice. You took away my right to choose. I made the only choice I could, she said, her voice trembling. I chose my son. I chose to raise him away from this world, away from the pressure and the tabloids and the man who was too busy building an empire to notice what he was tearing down. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the ghosts of what could have been. Adrian sank into a chair opposite her, the vast expanse of the living room a chasm between them. Suddenly, his phone, which he had placed on the glass coffee table, buzzed to life. The screen lit up with a picture of him and Claire laughing on a yacht in St. Bart's. Claire, he said more to himself than to Elena. Elena's gaze flickered to the phone, her expression unreadable. You should probably answer that. Your fiancé will be worried. He knew he should. He knew he had a life to get back to, a merger, to finalize, a wedding to plan. But as he looked at Elena and the sleeping child in her arms, who had his eyes and his chin, he knew that his old life was over. The foundation he had built his entire world on was nothing but sand, and the tide had just come in. He ignored the ringing phone and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together. Tell me about him, he said, his voice soft pleading. Please, tell me everything. Elena hesitated, searching his face for something he didn't know what. Then slowly, as if opening a door that had been locked for a long time, she began to speak. She told him about Leo's first word, Dada, a cruel twist of irony that made Adrian's heart ache, his love for dinosaurs, his fear of the dark. She told him about the struggles of being a single mother, the financial worries, the loneliness. She painted a picture of a life that was messy and imperfect, and so full of love, it made Adrian's chest ache with a longing he had never known. As she spoke, the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the marble floor. The city lights of Manhattan twinkled to life, a galaxy of stars at their feet. But for the first time, Adrian wasn't looking at the empire he had conquered. He was looking at the small, fierce woman in front of him and the son he had almost lost forever. He knew this was just the beginning. There would be fights, there would be tears, there would be the formidable obstacle of Claire and the world he had built. But as he listened to Elena's quiet voice, he made a silent vow. He had been a fool once, a boy who had chosen ambition over love. He would not make the same mistake again. He would fight for his son. And maybe, just maybe, he would fight for a second chance with the woman he had never stopped loving. The ringing of his phone finally stopped plunging the room back into silence. But it wasn't an empty silence anymore. It was a silence full of possibility, of hope, of the terrifying, exhilarating prospect of a new beginning. He was Adrian Vance, the man who had everything, and he was about to risk it all for the one thing he had just found. The morning sun, a mercilessly cheerful blade of light, sliced through the panoramic windows of the penthouse. It illuminated a scene of quiet domesticity that was utterly alien to the space. A half-eaten bowl of cereal sat on the coffee table, and a small, brightly colored dinosaur lay abandoned on a plush white rug. Adrian, who had spent a restless night on a sofa that cost more than most cars, felt a crick in his neck and a profound sense of dislocation. He'd barely slept, his mind a chaotic slideshow of images, Elena's face softened in sleep, Leo's chubby hands, and the terrifying, exhilarating chasm that had opened up in his life. He found them in the kitchen, a sleek, sterile expanse of sub-zero appliances and Italian granite. It was a space designed for caterers, not for family breakfasts, yet Elena was commanding it with a box of pancake mix and a quiet determination. Leo, perched on a countertop like a little king on his throne, was swinging his bare feet, chattering about a dream involving a friendly T-Rex who loved to eat crayons. A light dusting of flour powdered his nose, and the sight sent a strange, painful pang through Adrian's chest. It was a glimpse into a parallel universe, a life he could have had filled with small, messy, beautiful moments. "Smells good," Adrian said, his voice husky from sleep and disuse. The cheerful chatter stopped instantly. Leo's wide blue eyes, his eyes fixed on Adrian, and a flicker of apprehension crossed his face. He instinctively scooted closer to Elena, his small hand gripping the fabric of her sweater. "Mommy, it's the man from the airport." "It's okay, sweetie," Elena said, her voice a soft murmur meant to soothe. She didn't look at Adrian, keeping her focus on stirring the batter with a little too much force. "This is Adrian. He's an old friend of Mommy's." "An old friend," Adrian repeated softly, the words feeling like a demotion, a classification that was both true and a lie. He was a ghost from a past she had survived without him. He opened his mouth to say more, to protest the title, to say anything that might bridge the canyon between them, but the musical chime of the private elevator cut through the tense air. A moment later, Claire Vanderbilt swept into the room. She was the very picture of effortless Manhattan perfection, a vision in a cream-colored Chanel suit, her blonde hair in a flawless chignon. She held a leather briefcase in one hand and a bright, determined smile on her face, a smile that faltered the moment she took in the scene. "Adrian, darling," she began, her voice crisp and confident. "I know you said you needed space, but David is having an absolute meltdown about the London deal, and I thought—" Her words trailed off as her brain processed the tableau before her. Her gaze, sharp and analytical, darted from Adrian, disheveled and out of place in his own home, to Elena, whose grip on a spatula had tightened like she was holding a weapon, and finally to the small, dark-haired boy on the counter. The air crackled thick with unspoken questions. Claire's smile didn't just falter. It vanished, replaced by a mask of cool, polite confusion that barely concealed the dawning horror beneath. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice taking on a glacial edge. "Am I interrupting something?" The silence was a physical entity, heavy and suffocating. Adrian felt like he was standing on a fault line, the two tectonic plates of his life grinding against each other, about to erupt. "Claire," he said, his voice strained. He took a half step forward, as if to physically place himself between the two women, between his past and his present. This is Elena Petrova, and this is Leo. Claire's eyes narrowed on Elena. A flicker of something cold and dismissive passed through them. She remembered the name. Adrian, in the early days of their relationship, had sometimes mentioned it in his sleep, a muttered, tormented sound. Petrova Claire repeated her tone, making the name sound like an unfortunate stain. The artist. I see. Her gaze then slid to Leo, and she froze. Claire was a Vanderbilt. She had been raised on strategy, on assessing situations and people in a single, calculating glance. She was a smart woman. She could do the math. The carefully constructed mask of the perfect fiancée didn't just crack, it shattered. Raw, incandescent fury blazed in her eyes. Adrian, she said, her voice dangerously low and controlled. May I have a word with you, in private? She didn't wait for his answer. She turned on her 4-inch heel and marched toward his home office, her posture rigid with outrage. Adrian cast a helpless, apologetic look at Elena, but Elena had turned her back on him, her entire focus on the now burnt pancakes in the pan, her shoulders a testament to her own silent fury. The moment the heavy office door clicked shut, Claire's composure disintegrated. A child, Adrian, she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. You have a child? And you didn't think that was pertinent information to share with me? The woman you're supposed to marry in 3 months. I just found out yesterday, Claire, he said, the words sounding weak and inadequate even to his own ears. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of profound exhaustion. Oh, you just found out, she mocked, her voice dripping with a corrosive sarcasm. How convenient. And what was the plan? Were you going to wait until after the honeymoon? Keep your little secret family tucked away in a guest room while we picked out wedding china. Do you have any idea how this will look? The scandal. My father. The tabloids will have a field day. Billionaire Adrian Vance's love child. It will destroy us. He questioned, a cold anger beginning to cut through his fatigue. Her first thought wasn't about the boy or about him, but about the optics. Or is this about the Vance Vanderbilt brand? Is that what this is about, Claire? Public relations? This is about our life, she shot back, her voice rising, finally cracking with the force of her rage. The life we have built, the one we agreed to, the partnerships, the social standing, the charitable boards. Everything is connected, Adrian, you know that. You taught me that, and you have just thrown a grenade into the middle of it all. He looked at her, then really looked at her, as if for the first time. She was beautiful, poised, ambitious, a perfect partner for the man he had been ruthlessly trying to become. But as he looked into her furious eyes, he saw only a mirror of his own worst impulses. He saw ambition, calculation, and a bottomless need for control. There was no room for a messy, complicated, 4-year-old boy in her meticulously planned world. He's my son, Claire, he said, his voice quiet but resolute. The words settled in the air between them, simple, powerful, and undeniable. The finality in his tone seemed to wound her more than the shouting. And what about us? She demanded, a raw, genuine hurt finally breaking through the outrage. What about the wedding, the house in the Hamptons, our future? Adrian thought of Leo's unrestrained giggle, of Elena's weary strength, of the gaping hole in his own life he had tried to fill with mergers and mansions, and a fiancée who was, he now realized, another acquisition. I don't know, he said, and the simple, terrifying honesty of it was a form of liberation. I need time. Time, she scoffed, a bitter, incredulous laugh escaping her lips. Don't you dare ask me for time, Adrian. There is no time. You have a choice to make right here, right now. It's her and her son. She spat the word like a curse, or it's me. It's this mess, or the empire we were supposed to build together. You can't have both. She stood there, radiating an ultimatum, a queen demanding fealty. And in that moment, Adrian saw the future. She was offering him a life of polished surfaces and empty victories, a gilded cage. She didn't wait for his answer. She knew she wouldn't get the one she wanted. She snatched her briefcase from his desk and stormed out of the office, leaving the scent of her expensive perfume and the wreckage of their future in her wake. The chime of the elevator was a final definitive note. Adrian walked slowly back into the kitchen. The smell of burnt pancakes hung heavy in the air. Elena was standing by the sink, staring out the window at the city below, her shoulders slumped. Leo was gone. He's in the living room watching cartoons, she said, her voice hollow. I thought it was best. She's gone. Adrian stated the obvious, the words feeling inadequate. Elena nodded, not turning around. I heard. It's a big room, but not that big. She gave me an ultimatum. Of course she did, she said, a bitter edge to her voice. He moved to stand beside her, the space between them charged with 5 years of unsaid things. Elena, he began, his voice barely a whisper. I'm not that man anymore. The one who would choose the deal, the ambition, the one who would choose a life like that over. He trailed off, unable to articulate the enormity of what he was feeling. She finally turned to face him, her dark eyes searching his, looking for the truth beneath the chaos. Are you sure, Adrian? Because this is going to get ugly. The woman who just left here is not going to go quietly. Your life, the one you've built, is about to be turned upside down. The media, your business partners, your friends, they will not be kind. Let them try, he said, a fierce, unfamiliar wave of protectiveness washing over him. I don't care about any of that anymore. I care about him. And he hesitated, the words catching in his throat. I care about you. He reached out his hand, hovering for a moment, before he gently tucked a stray curl behind her ear. The simple, familiar gesture was more intimate than any of the passionate encounters of their past. For a fleeting second, she leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering shut, and the years of anger and hurt seemed to melt away, leaving only the raw, undeniable connection that had always simmered beneath the surface. But then, just as quickly, she pulled back the shield of her self-preservation firmly back in place. This doesn't change what happened, Adrian. You don't just get to walk back in and be a father. It's a title you have to earn. And you have to prove to me and to him that you're not going to run when things get hard. Because they will. He nodded, the truth of her words, hitting him with the force of a physical blow. I know, and I will. I'll do whatever it takes. As if on cue, his phone, forgotten on the counter, buzzed violently, dragging them back to the harsh reality of their situation. The screen read David Chen. He answered, a sense of dread coiling in his stomach. Adrian, what in the hell is going on? David's voice was a frantic squawk, stripped of its usual corporate polish. The board is in a full-blown panic. Charles Vanderbilt just invoked the character clause and pulled out of the merger. He's citing unforeseen moral complications. The story is already breaking on the financial news wires. The stock is in free fall. You need to get here now. You need to fix this. The war had begun. Claire hadn't even waited until she was out of the building to fire the first shot. It was aimed directly at the heart of his empire. He looked from the phone in his hand to Elena, who was watching him, her expression a mixture of fear and challenge. He had a choice to make. the boardroom, or the little boy watching cartoons in his living room. For the first time in his adult life, it wasn't a choice at all. "David," he said, his voice calm, steady, the voice of a man who had finally found his true north. "Cancel the meetings, all of them. Something more important has come up." He ended the call, the sound of his COO's sputtering protests fading into insignificance. He was Adrian Vance, and he was about to let his kingdom burn for a chance to be a father. The fallout was not merely swift. It was a digital tsunami, a ruthless and coordinated demolition of the Adrian Vance brand. Claire, wielding her family name like a cudgel, ensured there was no corner of his life left untouched. The first wave hit the financial news outlets. Vanderbilt merger collapses, Vance's moral complications cited, screamed the headline on Bloomberg. Within an hour, Vance Innovations stock had plummeted 17%. Then came the second wave, the one aimed not at his wallet, but at his character. The tabloids fed a steady stream of exclusive tips from a source close to the Vanderbilt family went into a feeding frenzy. Vance's vice, the billionaire, the baby mama, and the boy he hid. Read one particularly vicious cover featuring a grainy photo of Elena in the airport next to a polished red carpet shot of Adrian and Claire. They painted Elena as a gold-digging opportunist and Adrian as a reckless, immoral hedonist. His carefully constructed image as a brilliant, focused visionary was systematically dismantled and replaced with that of a liar. His world, once a fortress of power and control, was under siege. The board of Vance Innovations, a council of old money vultures who had championed him when he was making them rich, now saw him as a liability. He sat in the center of a polished mahogany table, the sole focus of their collective fury. 17%, Adrian, bellowed a portly man named Arthur Hemingway, his jowls quivering with indignation. "We've lost 2 years of growth in 2 days because of your indiscretions. This isn't about the market, Arthur. It's a targeted attack," Adrian countered. His voice a low, dangerous calm he didn't feel. "It's about shareholder confidence," another board member, a severe woman named Beatrice Shaw, interjected. "And right now, we have zero confidence that you can steer this ship through a storm you created." "David," she said, turning to his COO, "what's the sentiment among the department heads?" David Chen, his friend and second in command, for a decade shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He wouldn't meet Adrian's eye. "They're concerned, Beatrice. The instability is making our partners nervous." It was a textbook betrayal, sanitized with corporate jargon, and it cut Adrian deeper than any headline. He was losing his company. But the war for his empire was nothing compared to the war being waged inside his own home. The penthouse, once a symbol of his success, had become a luxurious prison. Paparazzi with long-lens cameras were camped out in the building across the street, turning their lives into a 24/7 reality show. Every drawn curtain, every flicker of a light was subject to scrutiny. He tried to shield Elena and Leo from the worst of it, but the poison seeped in through the cracks. The strain was a corrosive acid eating away at the fragile truce they had forged. "He asked me again why he can't go to the park," Elena said one evening, her voice tight with a tension that had become the new normal. She was pacing the length of the living room, a caged animal in a $1,000 sweater. "He saw a picture of himself on my tablet. He asked, 'Mommy, why is that man calling me a love child?' What do I tell him, Adrian? How do I explain a world this ugly to a 4-year-old? I'm trying, Elena." He said the words, feeling hollow, even to him. He was stretched to his breaking point, fighting battles on all fronts and losing ground on every one. My lawyers are filing injunctions, but the law moves slowly. Slowly, she scoffed, whirling to face him. This isn't a business deal that can be postponed. This is my son's childhood. You're Adrian Vance. People listen when you talk. You build cities out of code and move markets with a whisper. You're supposed to be able to fix anything. I can't fix this. He finally roared, the dam of his control bursting. He slammed a hand down on the granite countertop, the sound cracking through the tense silence. I can't just snap my fingers and make the world go away. This is the world you were trying to protect him from. Remember the one you said I was king of? Well, the kingdom is crumbling and we're all buried in the rubble. The moment the words left his mouth, he felt the destructive force of them. He saw the profound hurt in her eyes, the way she physically recoiled as if he'd struck her. He had taken her most selfless act, protecting her son, and twisted it into an accusation. I'm sorry, he rasped, the anger vanishing as quickly as it had come, leaving only shame in its wake. Elena, I shouldn't have said that. She wrapped her arms around herself, a fragile shield against his words. Maybe you should have, she whispered, her voice devoid of its usual fire. Maybe I was a fool to think we could do this. Maybe I should have just stayed on that flight to Portland, disappeared into a life where no one knows your name. No, he said, crossing the room to her, his heart aching at the defeat in her voice. Don't say that. We will get through this. How? She asked, her voice breaking, finally letting the tears she'd been holding back fall. Look at us, Adrian. We're trapped, and it's only going to get worse. She was right. The next day, a courier delivered a thick legal envelope. It was a lawsuit from Claire. Not for breach of contract over the wedding, but a multi-million-dollar suit for emotional distress fraud and reputational damage. It was a vicious, frivolous attack designed to be a public spectacle and bleed him dry through legal fees. But that wasn't the dagger. Buried deep within the legalese was the true purpose of the suit. A petition for a court-ordered paternity test followed immediately by a motion to have his parental rights evaluated and potentially terminated. It cited his unstable, chaotic, and morally bankrupt lifestyle as a clear and present danger to the child's welfare. It included sworn affidavits from anonymous former employees detailing his long work hours and volatile temper, painting him as an absentee father at best, a monster at worst. She was using his son, not just as a weapon, but as the tip of the spear aimed directly at his heart. The rage that filled him was a cold, clarifying fire. This was no longer about a broken engagement, or a bruised ego, or a falling stock price. This was a line that should never have been crossed. He found Elena in Leo's temporary room. She had built a fortress of pillows and blankets around the bed, and they were inside with a flashlight, making shadow puppets on the castle walls. The scene was so peaceful, so innocent, so completely at odds with the depravity in the documents he held that it almost broke him. He waited until Leo was asleep, his small face peaceful in the dim light, before he showed her the papers. She read them, her face growing paler with each paragraph. When she looked up at him, her eyes were wide with a terror that went bone deep. This was her greatest fear realized. She can't do this, Elena whispered, her hand trembling as she held the papers. They can't take him away from me. She's not going to, Adrian said, his voice a low growl that held the promise of retribution. I won't let her. In that instant, everything else fell away. The years of hurt, the recent arguments, the suffocating tension, it all vanished. They were no longer two broken people circling each other's pain. They were parents, a wolf and a wolf mother united against a threat to their cub. "What do we do?" she asked, looking to him not as a failed king, but as Leo's father. "We fight back," he said, "but not in her arena. The courts are her father's territory. We go after the foundation." He spent the next 48 hours locked in his home office, a man possessed. He didn't call his high-priced corporate lawyers. He called a number he hadn't used in years. Mike Corrigan, a grizzled ex-cop turned private investigator, a man who navigated the city's underbelly with a cynical grace. Corrigan owed him a favor, a big one from a time before Adrian wore $1,000 suits. "I need you to dig into Charles Vanderbilt," Adrian said, foregoing any pleasantries. "Not his public portfolio. I want to know where the bodies are buried. Offshore accounts, shell corporations, political favors. I want to know what he fears most." "That's a deep, dark hole you're asking me to go down, Vance." Corrigan's gravelly voice came through the phone. "Men like Vanderbilt don't just have skeletons in their closets, they have graveyards." "Then I want a map to every single tombstone," Adrian said. "Whatever it takes." While he hunted for ghosts, Elena held down the fort, creating a sanctuary of normalcy for Leo. She taped huge sheets of paper to the marble walls and let him paint murals of blue dinosaurs and red rocket ships. They had indoor picnics on the living room floor and built sprawling cities out of Legos that took over the entire room. She was his anchor in a world that had turned into a swirling vortex, and watching her, Adrian felt a love so fierce and profound it eclipsed everything else. He wasn't just falling for her again. He was seeing the woman she had become, and she was magnificent. On the third day, Corrigan called back. "You were right," he said, the absence of his usual cynicism making the words more potent. "The Vanderbilt merger wasn't about growth. It was a life raft. Charles is leveraged to the hilt personally and professionally. He was counting on your capital to keep from going under. But that's just the appetizer. The main course is some exceptionally creative accounting he's been doing for the last 5 years, enough to get him a permanent all-expenses-paid vacation to a federal resort." A grim, cold satisfaction settled over Adrian. It was an ugly weapon, but it was the only language men like Charles Vanderbilt understood. Power. He arranged a meeting at a quiet, wood-paneled restaurant in Midtown, a place where power was the currency of choice. He arrived first, taking a corner booth and enduring the whispers and stares from the other patrons. He was a pariah, a fallen king, holding court one last time. Claire and her father arrived, radiating a smug, predatory confidence. They thought this was his surrender. Adrian Charles began, his tone dripping with condescension. "I'm glad you've come to your senses. This entire episode has been most distasteful." Adrian let the insult hang in the air for a moment before sliding a single manila folder across the polished table. "I think you'll find this more distasteful. Read it carefully." Charles's sneer faltered as he opened the folder. He scanned the first page, a summary of offshore wire transfers, and the blood drained from his face. Claire leaned over, her perfectly lipsticked mouth falling open as she recognized account numbers and shell corporation names. The evidence was irrefutable. This is blackmail." Charles sputtered, his face a mottled apoplectic red. "I prefer to think of it as a negotiation," Adrian said, his voice quiet and precise, each word a perfectly aimed dart. "Here are my terms. You will drop the lawsuit, all of it. You will issue a public statement retracting your previous allegations, citing a misunderstanding. You will leave my family, Elena, and my son alone. Permanently. In return, this folder and the mountain of evidence it represents will disappear. I might even be persuaded to arrange a private high-interest loan to help you with your liquidity problem. Claire stared at him, her blue eyes wide with a venomous disbelief. You would do this after everything we were to each other. You would ruin my father. Adrian leaned forward, his gaze locking onto hers, and for the first time she saw not the man she thought she could control, but a stranger, someone colder and far more dangerous. You tried to take my son, he said, his voice a blade of ice. You have no idea what I would do to protect him. He stood, leaving the folder on the table like a ticking bomb. You have 24 hours. I trust you'll make the wise decision. He walked out of the restaurant, not looking back. There was no triumph in his victory, only the bitter taste of ash. He had become the monster they accused him of being, using the same ruthless tactics that had driven Elena away all those years ago. Had he saved his son, only to lose his soul, he returned to the penthouse, the weight of his actions, a physical burden. The living room was dark, save for the glow of the city lights. He found Elena asleep on the sofa, a children's book resting on her chest. Leo was curled beside her, his small hand clutching the fabric of her shirt, a tiny anchor in the storm. He knelt beside them, the man who could move markets, but couldn't protect them from his own world. He gently brushed a strand of hair from Elena's face, his touch hesitant. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open, soft and unguarded in the dim light. It's done, he said, his voice rough. They'll back off. She sat up slowly, her gaze searching his, seeing the conflict warring within him. How? He couldn't meet her eyes. I did what I had to do. I became the man you left. She was silent for a long moment, then she reached out her hand covering his. It wasn't a gesture of passion, but of solidarity. Look at me, Adrian. He forced himself to meet her gaze, expecting to see disappointment, perhaps even disgust. Instead, he saw a deep, knowing understanding. No, she said softly, her voice clearing the ashes from his soul. The man I left would have done this for his company, for his pride. You did this for your son. You did what a father would do. You used the darkness to protect the light. And in that moment, under the silent, watchful eyes of the city, he knew he hadn't lost his soul. He had finally found it. He had faced the monster within and bent it to his will, not for power, but for love. He was no longer just a king of a crumbling empire. He was a father, and that was a kingdom that could never be taken from him. Adrian Vance learned that the greatest mergers aren't signed in a boardroom, but are forged in the heart. He traded his empire for a child's laughter and a second chance at a love he thought he'd lost forever. Their story is a powerful reminder that true wealth isn't measured in billions, but in the moments that make us human. What would you risk for the people you love? If this story of sacrifice, drama, and redemption touched your heart, please give this video a like, share it with someone who loves a story of second chances, and don't forget to subscribe for more unforgettable tales. Let us know in the comments what you think of Adrian's ultimate choice. We'd love to hear from you.